I'm so excited to introduce you today to Dr. Robin Stern. Dr. Stern is a licensed psychoanalyst, educator, and she authored the book, The Gaslight Effect: How to Spot and Survive the Hidden Manipulations Others Use to Control Your Life. She recently released a workbook version of that book called The Gaslight Effect Recovery, and she has a podcast by the same name called The Gaslight Effect. Today, she's joining me to talk about the underlying dynamics of gaslighting relationships, particularly the hidden motivations of not only the gaslighter, but of the gaslightee. Thank you for joining me on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience. Each week, I'll take a vulnerable look at the nitty-gritty details of narcissistic abuse, at the underlying dynamics that make these relationships so challenging. This is a listener-supported podcast, so thank you for becoming a sponsor for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. Now you don't need to wait a week to get your next podcast fix. Join Breaking Free from Narc Abuse at substack.com to get exclusive audio content for subscribers. To sign up, click the link in the show notes. I'm so excited today to be joined by Dr. Robin Stern. She has written and spoken on gaslighting. She has a bestseller out called The Gaslighting Effect. Dr. Stern, thank you so much for being here, because there's a lot of conversations going on around gaslighting. In fact, last year it was the year of the world, the word of the year, I believe. It was either 2023. Yeah, exactly.
2022. Yeah,
2022. So tell me first what gaslighting is, because I've noticed there's some confusion going on about it. Some people now think that gaslighting is when you make me feel uncomfortable, you kind of call me out on my feelings. Other people say, no, it's just lying. What is gaslighting?
So gaslighting is what happens when one person, usually a person with greater power in the relationship, manipulates their partner or the gaslightee such that the gaslightee begins to second guess their own phone number, their character, their memory, their perception. It's a kind of a psychological abuse in manipulating your reality to join mine.
Yeah. When you say that, does the person who's doing the gaslighting know that they're being manipulative or exploitive?
So that is a great question. And one that I don't often get asked. So I really appreciate your asking. In fact, I just submitted an article about this with an answer to that question. Sometimes is the answer. And in the 1944 movie, Gaslight, where many people learned about gaslighting, where the diabolical husband, played by Charles Boyer, manipulates his adoring wife, played by Ingrid Bergman, in order for him to have her trust him more so that he could have access to her old home where he knew that there were jewels upstairs that he wanted to steal. So the backstory that the audience gets to see is that her very famous relative was murdered in this house. And then you watch him, Charles Boyer character, courting this young singer, and they eventually move back to that house. And I will bother to go into the longer story behind it, but we already know he's sinister. But she thinks he's this, he's beguiling her with his charisma and with his adoring her, seemingly adoring her, and convincing her to move back to that house. And so once in the house, of course, he starts playing with the gaslight. It's set in old England, so that's how they lit their rooms. And when she questions whether people notice the flickering or he notices the flickering, he says, no, of course not. What flickering? There's no flickering. Hence the name Gaslight. And in that movie, he was consciously manipulating her. He was conscious of what he was saying, of the messages he was giving her. You don't have a memory, you're crazy, you're ill, all of those messages. It's not always that way. Very often people either happen into the gaslighting because they're caught in, for example, an uncomfortable position. So I say to you, Kerry, I haven't heard from you in days. Like, you haven't called me. Where were you? And you say to me, why are you so paranoid? Because you don't want to tell me where you were, and you know you haven't called me, and you don't want to apologize, and you don't feel badly.
Right.
So in that moment, you might happen into twisting the conversation to blame me rather than taking responsibility. And it worked, because then I walk away and I'm thinking, maybe I am being paranoid. And what's worse is I start trying to prove to you I'm not I'm not really paranoid. Remember yesterday? Da, 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 da. And so in that case, the gaslighting may be unintentional, as I may not be trying to have you undermine all your judgment, but I am trying to get you to believe that there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed there's a whole range of it, because when I started learning more about gaslighting, I realized that I'd gaslit my kids. Like, for example, we're trying to get out of the house. They don't want to get out of the house. They're whining. And I will then comment on the whining instead of addressing their issue. Like, do you have to make it so difficult? Let's get out. We need to get to the car.
Right.
So I was really convicted, really uncomfortable when I realized that I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't very mature of me to do that. But yet, working with people who have suffered abuse of some form or even severe abuse, you can hear horrendous stories of people twisting things, driving their partners crazy even sometimes.
Yes.
So yeah, I realize there's this whole range. And I
think you're talking about parents. You were talking about parents and kids yourself. Certainly. I mean, I have two kids who watched me write my books and read alongside of me. And so they're very versed in gaslighting and aren't shy about saying, Mom, I think that's gaslighting. Gaslight them. But I think at the times that I have done it, or at times that I hear about it, often it's motivated by some anxiety. So, for instance, a young girl I was mentoring wrote a terrific article on on gaslighting, including a friend of hers in the article. And that friend was gaslighted by her mother, who she said to her mom, I'd like to go to this concert. And the mom said, the mom, who was very anxious about her going out with a group of friends and going to the concert, said, well, only bad girls go to that concert. Like, you're not one of those girls, are you? Like, I didn't think you were like that. And so over time, as she persisted in saying, I really want to go to the concert, the mom convinced her that maybe she was a bad girl and just didn't realize it. And the unintentional damage of that was, of course, she didn't go to the concert. But worse than that, she began to, according to the young woman I was working with, question her own judgment about everything. And I'm absolutely sure that this mom did not intend that. So the mom didn't intend to undermine her confidence in her judgment. She just wanted to stop her from going to this concert. And rather than saying, I'm sorry, I'm in charge, I'm nervous, I don't want you to do it, and you're not going, she led her to believe that there was something wrong or missing in the way she was thinking about herself. So that often happens with parents. They're anxious, or one of my favorite examples is go to the grocery store at 5 p.m. and you'll hear a mom say, you are not hungry, you're tired.
Yeah.
How many times have we done that? No, you don't hate your little brother, right?
That's right.
You love your little brother.
Right.
So you're not saying, I want to gaslight my child. I want him not to believe his own reality. But you want to make your point, and you want him to believe, or her to believe, or them to believe what you want them to believe in that moment. So you're insisting and foisting your distorted reality on them, or your hoped for reality on them. And all too often, people walk away from that and think, maybe I don't know what I'm feeling.
So let's kind of focus on both ends of it, the gaslighter and then the gaslightee. So to follow up on the gaslighter, it sounds like, do you think that there are multiple reasons why people gaslight? That there are, like, not only maybe different types of people who gaslight, but also different motivations for gaslighting?
I do think so. I think that I would say the underlying motivation is to be in control of the reality in that moment. But you want to be in control maybe because you don't want to get caught in something. You don't like the way you're feeling, you're uncomfortable, and you've had the experience of knowing that when you can control reality, you feel better. You want to deflect something. You want to deflect attention away from what happened. You don't like a set of people. Again, you want to control. You want the power in the moment. So you want to control the way somebody thinks about something. And it's not always diabolical. It could just be you don't feel like going to that relative's house. And so you engage in gaslighting so that you can have your gaslightee question her own motivation or her own feelings or what other people are feeling about her. So you don't have to do what you don't want to do.
It really sounds like it's a psychological maneuver to avoid discomfort, but one that's actually very costly to the relationship and costly to the person who's experiencing it, which I don't think at the time we realized that we're offloading, that we're harming things when we do this. We just, it's really a preservation of self is what I hear you describing.
Exactly. Either to confirm some belief you have or to protect your ego from being wrong or to just protect what you want to do in that moment. So it's always a bid for power and control. And the other thing that's important is that the gaslighter is as eager to keep the connection together, to keep that sense of we're joined as the gaslightee is. So one of the things that gaslightees, that people who are gaslighted really can't tolerate is the idea that they could pull away and just say, whatever, you have your own thoughts. But they won't necessarily get their partner's approval. So if your partner tells you, going back to the original, to my example earlier, if we're partners and I say to you, you are so paranoid, or you say to me, you're so paranoid, whoever is the gaslightee in that moment is going to be thinking, I'm not paranoid. I can't stand it that you think I'm paranoid. And until you can say to yourself, that's his problem or her problem. They think I'm paranoid. I know I'm not paranoid. And I'm just going to leave the conversation. I'm going to opt out of that back and forth where I'm defending myself over and over and over again. And so that want to be joined, that need to feel like you have your gaslighter's approval and you can't, just want to prove that I'm a good employee, that I have a great work ethic. I'm a good friend. I am a good daughter. Don't you see that? Until you can let go of that need to convince the other, you may be stuck.
You blew my mind with that statement because I had never picked up on that piece before. But the minute you said it, it made sense. Because as you well know, because I know you and I had a conversation that I was severely narcissistically abused in my second marriage. And this person was quite malevolent and extremely sophisticated at gaslighting. But I never picked up on the fact that he was trying to stay attached. But yet you're right. In that moment when I was faced with this gaslighted experience, and sometimes it was outrageous, though I knew it wasn't true, that I was facing a choice between staying connected and preserving his reality, or betraying myself by relinquishing my reality or my feelings or myself or whatever it was he was asking me to relinquish. But wow, I'm mind blown because we typically accuse narcissists and other toxic people of being so self-absorbed that they're not so concerned about the relationship. But actually, that's not true, is it?
It's not true in that dynamic for sure, because the gaslighter has made you part of his reality. So the narcissist, the narcissist gaslighter is very interested in keeping his kingdom together, his bubble together, and you're part of him. The extension of his reality is you're joining his reality, right?
Right.
And we, as women particularly, and this is something that I think is so important, we are taught to be accommodating. We're taught to be empathic and think about the other person and how they may be feeling. And we get so lost often in standing in other people's shoes that we forget we're even wearing shoes of our own. And so we are taught to accommodate. And when we accommodate quite a bit as children, we call that pathological accommodation. Like if we have a gaslighter parent and we're constantly giving up pieces of ourselves to join them. But it's no less pathological accommodation when we are grown up and we find ourselves giving over pieces of reality, giving over our feelings, giving over our voice, or giving up our voice. I mean, in the stages of gaslighting, the last stage where people are often, as you described, like depressed and feel like your soul has been destroyed and your identity is destroyed, you find yourself there's no reason to be complaining anymore because you've joined in thinking there's something wrong with you. And the something wrong with you is not that you have a difference of opinion than your gaslighter, but the real something wrong in that moment is that you've given up yourself.
That then takes me to the side of the gaslightee. Is there stages that they go through in this process? And I actually have kind of two questions. The stages, but also are some of us more vulnerable to gaslighting than others of us? So those are the kind of the dual piece of this.
Yeah. We are more vulnerable if we care a lot about what other people think of us. We are more vulnerable if we've had other kinds of gaslighting relationships or relationships where we have accommodated quite a bit, so that we're used to accommodating and we might not notice that that accommodating forces us or leads us to give our hand over to our dance partner and dance the gaslight tango. So if I've never experienced something like that before, I could go two ways. I could either say, wow, that guy is so charismatic and he's telling me all about myself and the way I should think or do think. And wow, that's really a cool thing. I've never experienced that before, but he's so charming. And I'm not going to focus on how he's telling me to think. I'm going to focus on the fact that he's charming. Or we can say, this sounds weird. Like somebody telling me some weird thing about me that I don't recognize that I'm doing. No, I'm out of here. But if we've accommodated before, or if we've disavowed our own experience before in order to go forward in a relationship. So disavowal is different than denial. Disavowal is, I know this happened, but I'm just going to make like it didn't. I'm going to pretend it didn't happen, because otherwise I'm going to have a big argument. It's going to be a big drama, and I'm just going to go forward. And after all, he's so wonderful. Thinking about a patient of mine who had a fight with her longtime boyfriend on the very first date. And the fight was over whether they should take a cab or the subway. It was a hot summer night. And she did not want to get stuck in the subway. So she said, I'd rather sit in a cab and risk that there's no air conditioning. I'll open the windows. And he took the subway. So he said, I'm not going to join you in the cab. I hate cabs on summer nights. I'm taking the subway. So he left her standing on a corner while he got into the subway. And she then took a cab. And on the way home, she was thinking to herself, she told me, there's no way I'm seeing this guy. Like, he just left me in the middle of Lower Manhattan. But by the time they got there, and he said to her, are you happy now? Are you happy with your disagreeing? Come on. You didn't have to be so difficult. She began to think, well, I am really attracted to him. He is so charming. He has a great job. I have been lonely. And maybe he's right.
It's so subtle. That's what's powerful about that example, is that it's not like this person actually came out and said some lie, some outright lie that you could point at and say that's wrong. I mean, he just said you're disagree.
You're difficult.
There's a conflict, and the conflict was because you were difficult.
Right.
And it's such an easy slide. We don't often pick up on that.
Right. And she heard it, but she chose to ignore it.
Right. Yeah. You talk about in the book, which I struggled with, honestly, about the idealization in a relationship. And I'm probably not setting up this question well enough for those who don't know what I'm talking about. But can you kind of talk about the power and equity in a relationship and what has to happen on the gaslighting side in order to participate in the gaslighting? Because I really struggled with that a lot.
Well, let me send back a question to you then. Okay. This is a really good conversation, because if I say to you, Kerry, you're very difficult. And I maybe you haven't noticed that you've been difficult about other decisions we've made. And I don't know what's wrong. Maybe your parents taught you that you should give people a hard time. I don't know. I don't know anything about your background, but you must know about that about yourself, don't you? If you don't somehow put me in a position, even if it's in the moment, she would know about these things. Or she could be, maybe she's smarter than I am, or maybe she sees something I don't, or she's really terrific, or I'm glad we're friends or partners, or whatever it is, whoever that is, that other person, whether it's a him or they or her, whatever, whoever. If you don't elevate me in some way, why not just walk away?
You're right.
Why is it so important then that you have my approval? Why is it so important that you don't have my approval in that moment?
You're right. But some relationships inherently have inequity of power. Like, say, for example, you go into your doctor, and I know this is something that's become more popular to talk about.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And you assume their authority because they have the education, they're wearing the white coat, you're seeking out treatment, you're paying them. I even know, as you and I, as psychologists, we've had people do this with us as well, trust us with things. And then this person says something to you. In fact, it happened to me. I remember that I had low potassium, and unusually low, and I was struggling. I was having a lot of symptoms. I went into the ER, and the doctor asked me twice, "You can tell me that you've been using drugs. You can confide in me." And I said, "No, I'm a licensed psychologist. I wouldn't dare threaten my credentials that way, my licensure that way. I'm not taking drugs. Something is wrong." And they came back, "You can trust us and tell us what you've been using." And they let me walk out sick. And it wasn't until a day later that my own physician came back and said, "Did they treat you for the low potassium in the ER?" I said, "No." She said, "What? You're really low." So that's an example of how I didn't know. I mean, it felt weird to be being accused to be a drug addict, but when that happens, it's very, they assume they're the expert.
But so did you then question yourself? Like you knew they were trying to gaslight you.
I did know that, but no, I knew I didn't take drugs.
Right.
No, I just knew that something was wrong and they were getting it wrong, but it felt uncomfortable.
Yes.
Felt very uncomfortable.
Yes. I mean, certainly you don't want the person who is treating you, who's a doctor, who you do have respect for. Maybe you don't anymore, but
that's right.
But, I consulted on a case where a woman who had an operation and came back to her doctor after the operation in a great deal of pain was first told, "Okay, well, you had a big operation. That's why you're in pain." And she kept going back and saying appointment after appointment for a series of appointments, I'm in too much pain. It doesn't feel right. I know I had a big operation, but it's months now. And he ultimately said to her, "You have low pain tolerance, and it's your problem because I've done this operation many times." At the end of the story is that down the road, she went to somebody else for a consultation, and it turned out that that doctor had left a piece of an instrument or a tip of an instrument in the part of her body he was doing surgery about. So, of course, they sued for malpractice, but they also sued for damages of gaslighting because over the time where she was feeling like maybe he's right, he's my doctor, he's done this operation so many times, and maybe I can't tolerate pain. I didn't think that of myself, but maybe he's right. She really lost a piece of herself during those years, during those months. And, I want to share that because we are both psychologists that when I first started researching gaslighting, after I saw the movie and had been seeing so many patients who were otherwise smart, successful women, very confident, being gaslighted, I'm researching, and what I found was that the cases that had been most written about and the journals I was looking for gaslighting work in were about patients telling their therapist, "I think I'm done with therapy." And the therapist then saying, "I don't know, we still have your family issues to what, but I'm feeling good and I feel like I'm really done." Like, and I'm the person sitting here on the treating you, and I'm telling you that there's still more. Now, obviously, no therapist who's an ethical, healthy therapist I know would say that. But unfortunately, it was an example that was used because when you are in a place of power and you're not ethical and you are not values-based, you can use your power to manipulate.
Right. So you bring up a really powerful point that I kind of want to wrap up this discussion with is that, so you said that when we move into a relationship and we in some way has elevated the other individual in some particular, because we want the relationship or because we value them, or maybe because we think they're the expert in whatever they're talking about.
It's also confirming, because if I want you, then I idealize you, or I've idealized you and then I want you. It's confirmation bias. So we're more likely to elevate you.
Right.
And idealize you.
The challenge, though, is, but if I don't somehow if I overly elevate myself, if I then see myself as entitled or privileged or superior or whatever, and then don't listen to what you have to say, I may miss critical information. But if I also underestimate myself or devalue myself, disrespect myself, I may overvalue your information. So how do we walk that fine line?
Well, it's an interesting way of putting it. So you're taking in, if somebody gives you feedback, here's a great example. And I've talked about this a lot, maybe even in our last conversation. I had a client whose boyfriend had convinced her that when they were walking on the street together in her neighborhood, that she should look down at the sidewalk so she wouldn't be at risk of being greeted by anyone, and then wouldn't be at risk of flirting with anyone while she was with her boyfriend. Now, she didn't think she was flirting with anyone, and she didn't think she was overly engaging with people on the street. She just thought she was being friendly. It was her neighborhood. The next step was that he told her that she should, when they sit down at the table, the restaurant in the neighborhood, that she should always face the wall. So again, she wouldn't be at risk of seeing someone else and then flirting or just engaging and saying hello. And when he was pointing out to her that their fighting had stopped because she was now looking down at the sidewalk and sitting facing the wall, she thought, he's right. But she was so uncomfortable in the relationship and so unhappy after a while that she came to see me. And when she talked about it, she was stuck right in the middle of what you're saying. She said, I know that there's nothing wrong with the way I'm walking down the street. Like, I'm confident enough to know that, but he's giving me this information and he is unhappy when I'm talking to people. So maybe I'm not giving him the respect that I owe him. After all, he's this amazing guy and I'm lucky to be with him. And he does, I wouldn't say that she elevated him, but she gave him the power because she had idealized him enough to go out with him. Right. And then when they were together and he gave her information, she decided to take it in because that was the only way to stay in a peaceful place with him. So she sacrificed her own evaluation of the feedback for the continuation of the relationship. But it is an important point because if somebody said to me, Robin, your glasses are pink. You know that, don't you? Your glasses are pink. You just think they're blue, but they're pink. There's no way. And I would just simply say you're wrong. So why then, when somebody manipulates or tries to manipulate or what we know to be true, do we give over our power?
Yeah, and it's the tension between sacrificing the relationship and, in fact, sacrificing ourselves. And I think that's a really great point that you're making, is that the example I was giving of over grandiose perspective of self versus idealizing the other person. The issue is the connection to the relationship and the connection to self, that they both should feel good all the time.
Right.
And if you're feeling like you're sacrificing yourself for the relationship, there's there's a problem. But if you feel like you're sacrificing the relationship for yourself and you're always like cutting relationships, there's a problem too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of finding this balance in the middle.
You know, I would hope that in a healthy relationship that we could give each other feedback. Hey, you know, I'm noticing that you don't seem to be yourself lately. I'm noticing you're not yourself lately. Because why is that, honey? Well, without judgment. Like, I'm just noticing that you seem to be receding from conversations and not as talkative. Are you okay? That's not my attempt to gaslight.
Yeah.
But could it be taken that way? Could it be taken? And if somebody is like living with a ghost of gaslighting,
yes,
somebody from another relationship where it was gaslighting, say, are you trying to gaslight me?
Right.
But then you continue the conversation in this healthy relationship and you say, I'm not. I honestly was noticing this.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
So it's not, no relationship is going to stand or fall on one interaction unless it's really out there and just completely abusive or racist or prejudiced or something.
Yeah. No, but I get what you're saying, because what you're really saying is that if the relationship is that brittle, it wasn't worth saving.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And in most relationships, there's room to talk about. I even think the example you just gave, it would be different if I said, you've not been acting okay. I just made a declaration.
Right.
And then you said, no, I'm been fine. Well, you certainly don't seem fine to me. Then now you're pigeonholing that person.
Right.
It's a lot different conversation and saying, are you okay? You seem to be a little withdrawn, because you're allowing freedom for them to say, no, I'm okay. I don't know what's going on. Maybe we just going to have a connection.
Right.
But
and in some research that I've been doing, identifying levels of gaslighting within these different stages, the levels of gaslighting have to do with the frequency, the intensity, the delivery, the way it's delivered. So if I say, hey, honey, I'm noticing this, it's very different than I'm saying, I'm noticing that you're not yourself.
Right.
You're not yourself, right?
Right. Right. Exactly.
I mean, that's very different than trying to create a tone of psychological safety or inviting, what does that feel right to you? Like checking in with the other person. Does that feel right? Rather than this is what's going on.
Exactly. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I know you and I could talk for a very long time on. There's so many angles.
I know, and we will again, I'm sure.
I hope we do. I thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. And for those of you, I'd love to have you join us over at Substack, because we're going to talk about how to recognize gaslighting, how to know when it's actually happening. So that will be for those who sign up for the newsletter, and we'll continue the conversation over there. But thank you so much, Dr. Stern, for being here with me today.
Please call me Robin, and thank you, Kerry.
You're welcome. All right. Thank you. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. And whether you're consider leaving, or have left a narcissistic relationship, find community support at my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can learn about this resource as well as others at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.